there differs. Rosamund might, but explore further on site if you'd like today, and we'll break at I think 12:30 for that. This session is politics, consequences, work, and I did distribute something in advance that's very intentionally general, and we will somewhat skew to that, but probably not as a strict process, but we'll cover all of that in the course of our conversation. The mission, as far as I'm concerned, remains the same, which is to take what we've established or broached in previous sessions and consider how the rubber hits the road, both in terms of what we see as the consequences of these meaningful dynamics, what we see those consequences are, and in terms of what can be set in motion once we're aware of the way that meaning works or can work, or the modes in which meaning works, especially vis-a-vis scriptures. So we'll register the themes that have already been coming up. I do like the idea of being very concrete in addition to abstractions, and I'd like to kind of steer us toward thinking about how signifying on Scripture's approach, which is not the same as a theoretics of meaning, but how that might intervene or evolve into a framework for critical intervention in all different kinds of arenas. But I thought I'd start with, I don't know if you're aware of a recurring but not regular feature on Slate, the online magazine's website. They do these stories are called If It Happened There, and they take a foreign correspondent approach to something that's happening in the States. So as if you're an outsider to the States. So they've done like Thanksgiving, or the State of the Union address, the occupation here in Oregon, but reported on it as if it weren't something of ours, right? So I thought I would read from the most recent, which is called If It Happened There, Death of Hardline Jurist Throws Regime into Chaos. And so it's about Scalia, and I'll just read parts of it.
By the way, the funeral is now.
Oh, is that right? Well, perfect. So the daylight is Washington, United States. The unexpected death of a hardline conservative jurist on America's constitutional court has exposed deep fissures within the ruling regime and threatens to throw the country's fragile political system into months of chaos. The 9 unelected justices who sit for lifetime terms on the Supreme Court are tasked with ensuring that laws passed by the democratically elected government don't violate the ancient juridical texts upon which the country's laws are based. As such, they wield immense powers and have the ability to overrule even the president himself. The aged, scholarly jurists, cloaked in long black robes, conduct their deliberations behind closed doors, shielded from the scrutiny of the media, and their most important decisions are often released to the public with great drama but little warning. Respected by both allies and enemies, Antonin Scalia was a religious fundamentalist and a fierce ideologue known for his stylish and original readings of the ancient texts. He led a movement within the court that supported adhering closely to the principles of the nation's founding revolution, even as many laws have appeared out of step with the values of the modern world. He and his acolytes have often stood in the way of dissidents' efforts to use the American legal system to seek increased rights for women, gays, and ethnic minorities. And I'll skip, it talks a little bit about how important this is in an election context. But it continues later. Outside observers hope that the crisis can be resolved soon. With a divided and short-handed court unable to issue definitive decisions, it's possible that certain laws may be interpreted differently by lower courts in different regions of the country. Rural areas where the strictest form of political Christianity holds sway may push for restrictions on abortion and on the availability of birth control in accordance with traditional beliefs, in contrast with the coastal urban population centers where such practices are more culturally accepted. Confusingly, both sides of America's political divide claim that they're upholding the values of the revolution, and that's the American Revolution. If the court continues to be unable to act as the final authority in these disputes, that will only deepen political divisions at a time when unease and violent unrest are already rampant. But American legal scholars disagree on what the ancient texts say and what the ancient texts say should be done in this situation, and the confrontation is likely to drag on for some time. And so that's sort of like, an alien or foreign approach to what's insider perhaps to us. And it is interesting to me because, Scalia's textual originalism is not just not reader response criticism of those Western biblical studies. It's not even historical criticism or historical critical method as I understand it, because he was interested in looking at what the text said, not even in original context, right? So what the text, what the artifact says. And I find that quite interesting, especially with what Ronnie was talking about in terms of artistic meaning, the inherent meaning and the relational meaning. And there I think we're getting into the aesthetics, the distribution of the sensible, because for Scalia, that's what was left, was the document, the word, which would be, perceivable to the senses, and not historical context, not necessarily modern context. So obviously he brings up a lot of questions, and I hope we can get into those. And if anyone wants to intervene now, that would be fine. But I can also talk a little bit more about where this might go. Does anyone burning to say anything about Scalia?
Burning is a good word.
What's that?
Burning. Sorry about the violence.
Yes.
Well, I thought that I have some thoughts, and perhaps, and not specifically about Scalia, but thinking this was my first encounter with Rancière, so being totally fresh to that, it sparked some of my thinking, and I sort of, been involved in these conversations for some time, and have over time developed my own framework, which I think is probably different from many of yours, and even different from perhaps what the ISS consensus is. But I thought maybe if I just read a couple paragraphs explaining how I feel they come together, we can bounce off that. All right. So as I was saying in a small group yesterday, what struck me about Rancière's aesthetics is that they exist, I think he says a priori, and in a judicial situation that has its own specific meanings. But I'm just taking that as something that's either prior or more fundamental, sort of in the ether. That's aesthetics. It predicates the polis. But aesthetics nonetheless constitutes and continues to shape politics, even once a polis is instantiated or organized on top of, or however you're considering or conceptualizing the relationship of aesthetics and the polis. And I perhaps want to ask you all if you think scriptures are aesthetics. In the sense that they're observable, even if they're not precisely tangible, I think there's an argument to be made that they are at least aesthetics, maybe something else. They can be apprehended with the senses. A scripture is an aesthetic externalization. It's something we can point to outside of ourselves that provides validation that comes back to us. This is why Seth mentioned this yesterday in a small group, and you can probably say it better than I, because to my shame I haven't read Infinite Jest, but the idea that is a carnival actor or a sideshow sort of.
So we're talking in the context of sort of where authority might come from, and I said in the teaching context when I get to this point, so why is Foucault able to say, see the world this way, where is he standing to say that, right? Those kinds of moments always happen, and the thing I always use is from Infinite Jest, where there's this sort of recurring theme, sort of people have seen at a carnival, a man pulling above his head a chair that he is simultaneously standing on. And it's like a square circle, you can't picture it, but that's what it would mean to kind of begin having authority, right, or to start this kind of conversation. So anyway, that's...
And so what that made me think of is how scripture, being something that we can point to outside of ourselves, gives us the leverage to then lift our own chairs. It's sort of how I was thinking about that. And so back to aesthetics, the more that we and those around us observe that a scripture is observable, something real or existing in the world or becoming more real, the more that scripture is reified, naturalized, or considered bedrock upon which politics can be built, or something that politics should answer to, that's a process of scripturalization. So if we follow Rancière as I'm reading him, then aesthetics is the basis of politics, even as it feels somehow firmer than human political activity, or more enduring, or something like that. Scriptures, in a sense, then taps into this pre-political sensory soup of the observable that has outsized effect on the political. And so we can see how creating or wielding aesthetics, scriptures, not just texts, but in their multiplicity. So as aesthetics, even if they're created as of late, scriptures posture as pre-political realities that human politics must contort to accommodate. So I'm wondering if scriptures are aesthetics, and if that's part of their mechanism, how they start influencing the political. So,
I guess to signify on you, if I will, I think scriptures is the manual of style, rather than the aesthetics themselves, right? And they can be veiled, right? They can be I guess that'd be like convention or custom, and then sometimes you actually have the handbook itself, right, that tells you. So you as an editor, right, are kind of the shaman that understands the customs that we don't have the book and can't find in Chicago Manual Style, like what we should be doing. But you know, this is how it usually goes. You can give us insight into that, right? And then you're, of course, not only good at the text, but help tutor us into becoming disciples of that text, or whatever it may be. And I think it doesn't just exist with text, but I think text is a really obvious example. I think you see this regulated in music, right? There are improvisations that are in the box, and there are improvisations that go a little too far, and it's like, yeah, you can't hack it. So I think it's that manual of style, the sort of rules about aesthetics, rather than this kind of amorphous concept of aesthetics itself.
yeah.
Fourth last